a tree on private land that meets that requirement, they'd have to go through a permitting process. And as a requirement of the permit, you'd have to come up with a plan to replace the tree, to replant the tree at a different location, or to pay into a tree replacement fund to ensure that the community can continue to maintain the number of trees that it has grown accustomed to. We all know the benefits that trees bring in terms of environment, also curb appeal. So I thought that this was a step in the right direction for us to begin vetting a process, Mr. President, to protect the trees and private canopy of trees in the community of Medford. There are a number of communities that have done this, Brookline, Newton, Cambridge, for example. I've taken the liberty of forwarding copies of draft ordinances from other communities to the city solicitor in anticipation that my council colleagues would support this endeavor and asking him this question. So with that being said, I would ask my council colleagues to support this resolution, asking that the solicitor draft us an ordinance for proper review and vetting that would govern the removal of trees on private property and establish replacement requirements thereof.
Thank you, Councilor Knight. Vice President Longo-Kern.
Thank you, President Falco. I just want to thank Councilor Knight for bringing this forward and mention, I think back in 2010, Roberta, Cameron, and I did work on a tree ordinance. We looked at a number of different cities. We drafted one ourselves, basically. At that time, we didn't have the support I don't believe the administration, wasn't very helpful to moving it forward, and I didn't have all the councilors' support, so I couldn't get it passed. But I'm really interested in taking another look at this, as well as any other, full tree ordinance. I think it's time. I backed down because we did at the time hire Curtis Student's mom, Aggie, who came in excited and knowledgeable and, willing to do what needed to be done to protect our trees. So I think we, at that time, felt confident and kind of fell by the wayside after I couldn't get the votes. So look forward to working on this in the next several months.
Thank you, Vice President Longo-Kern. Councilor Della Russo.
President, if I could, through the chair, ask my esteemed colleague if he could help come again at me, because I had a moment of distraction as you were speaking. I apologize. Were you saying that this will treat trees on private property and that the city will govern the care and requirements for trees on people's private property?
Mr. President, that is correct. Councilor Della Russo is correct. And when I brought this forward, one of the things I was thinking of was the lot of land across the street from the gas station on Winthrop Street, for example, where there were 50 or 60 trees there that were clear cut for a development, and those trees are not going to be replaced back into the community. Those trees are gone. The development never happened, so now we have a gigantic blown out rock wall that looks like it's a rock climbing wall over there. All the beautiful trees that were there are gone. It's a main thoroughfare. The trees were helping our environment in terms of pollution because of the amount of cars that travel down Route 60. So, Route 38 rather. So, yes, Councilor Della Russo would govern the demolition of trees on private property, and it would define a certain protected tree as one having certain characteristics or criteria relative to its size.
Mr. President, if I could comment on that. Firstly, I'd like to say that I don't find the area on Winthrop Street at all to be like a rock climbing area. I find it more to be like a prison yard, and perhaps something else that I won't say in public. Firstly. Secondly, in all seriousness, I'm concerned about this, Mr. President. While I maintain trees on my commercial property and expend amounts of money in their care and consult among knowledgeable people as to what's best for them, Mr. President, I also feel that I would be at liberty, whenever I choose to do so, as someone who owns private property in the United States of America, that country we invoke when we make our Pledge of Allegiance to the Republic for which that flag stands, I can do as I please with my trees, and I will not impede anyone from doing anything with their trees. Even if they own a majestic copper beech, I will not inflict laws upon them with how they should care for their trees. I think people should be at liberty to to exercise good judgment on their own property and exercise their free will with regards to their possessions, Mr. President. So I understand the councilor's sentiments. I understand other people's sentiments. But this councilor will not destroy people's liberty.
Thank you, Councilor Del
Mr.
Russo.
President, if I may, on that
Councilor Knight.
In my reading and researching of this in other communities, nothing in the proposed ordinance or the intent of this proposed ordinance would preclude somebody from doing whatever they want with a tree on their property. What it would do is require them to either pay into a fund to get a permit to remove the tree or to produce a plan to the tree warden that would be sufficient enough to satisfy her needs in terms of this replacement tree would, again, one tree's gone, one tree's up. It's a one-for-one division. If they can't put the tree on, relocate the tree or replant the tree on their private property, then they could pay into a tree replacement fund to the city, and the city could use that to enhance its streetscape, and it would be a funding mechanism thereof. But I can certainly understand Councilor Della Russo's concerns about this because it does infringe upon the liberty of private residents. That's why I'd like the city solicitor to go through the process of drafting an ordinance, and we'll have the opportunity to properly vet it.
Thank you, Councilor Knight. Councilor Del Russo.
And I don't want to turn this into a rebuttal at this late hour because I, more than anybody behind this rail, want to leave. Mr. President, I want to end this with a story. When I was a young man, we had a cottage in Lebanon, Maine, on a lake, and it was a beautiful place, and I enjoyed it very much. We don't have it any longer. My parents sold it and moved to the coast of Maine, where they enjoy the ocean. Be that as it may, about a mile through the woods up this hill was an old farm area, an old farm up there that was owned by this old Yankee family that was there from colonial times. And there were old houses that were all dilapidated and cow barns and sheep herd. And they had all these beautiful fields that had been farming fields and pastures that had been cleared from the forest, and all the stones were taken out to build the beautiful, typical New England rock walls. But they stopped working that farm. And 30 years later, I went up there, and you know what those fields are? Forests again. There are trees all coming up. So that family exercised its American free will to take out the trees and enjoy the fruits of the earth. And then when they gave up that pursuit, guess what nature did? It took it back.
Thank you, Councilor Del Russo. Councilor Marks.
Thank you, Mr. President. And, sometime back a few years ago, the city was looking, and I think it was Roberta Cameron at the time, offered a suggestion about adopt a tree. And it was actually having the city plant trees on private property. So if I was a homeowner and the city approached me and said, we'd love to put a tree at the corner of High and Elm Street or wherever it might be, would you like to have it on your property? We'll pay for the tree and so forth. It never went anywhere, the program, but I thought it was a great suggestion in increasing our trees in our community. I, however, have a problem with creating a permitting process to remove a tree on private property. Now, if it's a new development that's in an area that, as Councilor Knight referred to, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with telling a resident that there may be a list of certain protected trees that you want to remove one, and we're looking at either you may need to relocate the tree, and who knows how much that would cost, depending on the size of the tree and so forth. You may need to replace it. You may need to pay a permit to have it removed. I think it's a very slippery slope, Mr. President, that we're going down when we start getting involved in people's private property. We're all in favor of shade trees and doing whatever we can in this community, Mr. President. But I think it's an overreach, to be quite frank with you, to start dictating to people whether or not they can cut a tree down on their own private personal property. So I have a real problem with that. If you're talking about new development and maybe just that angle, I could support the city solicitor looking into that. But a general broad brush, Mr. President, of saying that everyone now has to go through a permitting process to take down a tree or make sure it's not a particular tree or relocate a tree. I think it's a burden on residents of this community and something that I could not support, Mr. President. So I appreciate what the council is trying to do, but I think there may be other ways, as I believe it's called Back of the Curb. Roberta may be able to speak to that program. I think it's called Back of the Curb program, where the city would go in and encourage private homeowners to plant trees. And I think that's an excellent concept, and I would support that, in order to increase our trees and the different types of trees in our community. But, reaching into someone's personal property, Mr. President, I have a problem with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Marks. Councilor Carviallo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think there is a program in the city right now on new construction that if there were trees there that you took down, they have to be replaced. I think Mrs. Tudin instituted that some years ago. So I think you may have something already in place that when you take a tree down on a new construction, you have to replace it. And I remember about 4 years ago, I was involved, 6 years ago, we were involved with the chamber, myself with Aggie Tudin and the mayor. We did a buy a tree, get a tree for the business community, and I think we put up about 18 trees around the city. So it ended up working out pretty good then too.
Thank you, Councilor Carviallo. Name and address for the record, please.
Excuse me. Hi, I'm Curtis Tootin. I live at 38 Early Ave, and I'm here tonight to speak for the Medford Energy and Environment Committee. So, just real quick, thank you, councilors, for making trees a priority. Medford's tree canopy has been in decline, so protecting significant community trees is more important than ever. Knowing how critical trees are to public health and ecology, a subcommittee of the Medford Energy and Environment Committee has worked on a report about local tree protection and other aspects of the proposed resolution. It will be completed soon, so for now there's just one request, that the resolution create a general tree fund and not just a tree replacement fund. This would address the need to grow our community tree canopy and not only replace what we have left. Overall, we look forward to collaborating as the process moves forward, so thank you again.
Thank you.
I have a comment, Mr. President.
Councilor Knight.
Mr. President, in the research that I've been able to perform relative to other communities that have implemented this, some other communities have put criteria on it based upon the duration of home ownership to ensure that an individual is applying for a permit to remove a tree isn't a developer. They can show that they've lived at the property for an extended period of time. Nothing in the ordinance, again, would preclude somebody from removing a tree that was on their private property. It would just establish a certain criteria for us to establish a funding mechanism to replace trees in the community that are taken down on private properties. As everybody likes to say, there are two things that nobody wants to see be made in this world, a sausage and a law. That's why we asked the city solicitor to draft this, and then we'll have an opportunity to vet it. And ask my council colleagues to allow the solicitor the opportunity to come up with a draft ordinance for us to go through. And if we can reach a consensus for something that works for this community, that's great. If not, that's okay too. That's what we're here for.
Thank you, Councilor Knight. Councilor Della Russo.
Well, Mr. President, I've grown tired.
Thank you, Councilor Della Russo.
Mr. President?
Councilor Marks.
Just if I could, because, once we ask as a council the city solicitor to create an ordinance based on what's being submitted to us, I have a concern with the language that's in this, because the council is saying not to preclude someone from taking down a tree, but it also says there's a permitting process and certain trees are protected. So I don't know, are there certain trees that you're never going to be able to remove? Are there certain trees that you're going to have to relocate? Everyone now is going to, if you want to remove a tree, going to have to pay a fee. Here goes another fee. We have a water fee now. We got a fee on everything. That's create a fee to move a tree or take down a tree on private property. Next, they'll charge you for cutting your grass. Anytime you want to cut your grass, we'll charge you a fee for that too. It really is. It's just another way of generating revenue. If the mayor wants to create a tree fund, she can do it overnight. She can do it overnight if she wanted to create a tree fund in this city. There's plenty of revenue streams right now that they could dedicate towards a tree fund if that's what the mayor's intent was to do. but to add a permit charge on someone that wants to remove a tree for a host of reasons. Most people that contact me about trees and so forth on private property, after I'm done